The first time I found him, he was barely breathing. A heap of matted fur and exposed ribs collapsed at the edge of my property, where the pine forest begins to swallow the cleared land. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the earth into a sodden carpet that squelched beneath my worn boots as I approached the creature. Steam rose from his body into the cold morning air, the only sign he was still alive. I should have called animal control. That's what anyone else in Blackwater Valley would have done. But something about the way he lay there, vulnerable and broken, stirred a memory inside me of another rainy day years ago when no one had stopped to help. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the gentle patter of raindrops on pine needles. "I won't hurt you." His head lifted slightly at my words, and I froze. 2 milky white orbs stared vacantly in my direction, blind eyes that couldn't see me but somehow seemed to look straight through to my soul. A low growl rumbled from his throat, more from fear than aggression. I recognized that sound. I'd made it myself, metaphorically speaking, every time someone had tried to get close since Daniel died. My grandmother would have called this a sign. She always said animals chose us, not the other way around. The silver locket she'd given me on her deathbed hung heavy around my neck. Inside was a scrap of paper with her final words to me. "Kindness to the broken heals the breaker." I'd never fully understood what she meant until that moment. "You can't stay here," I told the wolf, inching closer. "And I can't leave you to die." When I finally managed to coax him onto the tarp I'd brought from the shed, he was lighter than I expected, too light for a creature his size. Whatever had happened to him, whether illness, injury, or cruelty, had left him desperately malnourished. His blindness seemed relatively fresh. The scarring around his eyes wasn't fully healed. Getting him back to my cabin was a slow, painstaking process. Each time I pulled the makeshift sled over a particularly rough patch, he'd whimper softly, and I'd whisper reassurances that probably made no sense to him. But maybe, I thought, it wasn't the words that mattered so much as the tone. The promise that pain wasn't all that remained in his world. The cabin had been my sanctuary for nearly 2 years. After leaving the city and all its haunting memories behind, I'd poured everything I had into renovating the old family property. Nestled against the mountains, miles from the nearest neighbor, it was exactly the kind of isolation I'd craved. No prying eyes, no whispered condolences, no one watching as I slowly pieced myself back together. Now, I was bringing a wild animal into my private world. Madness, perhaps. But as I cleared a space in the mudroom and lined it with old blankets, I felt something stir inside me that had been dormant for too long. Purpose. "This is temporary," I told him as I gently transferred him to his new bed. "Just until you're strong enough to go back where you belong." His unseeing eyes tracked the sound of my movements as I gathered water, antiseptic, and the basic first aid supplies I kept on hand. When I approached to clean his wounds, his lips curled back to reveal impressive teeth. I stilled immediately. "I understand," I said softly. "Trust has to be earned. I'll wait." I sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, simply existing in the same space, letting him acclimate to my scent and presence. Eventually, his head lowered onto his paws, though the tension never fully left his body. Progress of a sort. That night, I slept on the sofa instead of in my bed upstairs, unwilling to leave him alone in a strange place. Through the darkness, I heard his occasional restless movements, the scrape of claws against the wooden floor as he tried to orient himself in his lightless world. Just before dawn, I woke to find him silent and still, his breathing shallow. "Please don't die," I whispered into the pre-dawn gloom. "Not here, not under my watch." It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, too. About proving that I could still nurture something back to health after failing so catastrophically with Daniel. The first week was touch and go. I managed to coax him into drinking water mixed with electrolytes and eventually to accept small pieces of cooked meat from a distance. I never touched him directly, respecting the invisible boundary he established. Each day, I talked to him about inconsequential things. The weather, the birds outside, the book I was reading. Not because he understood, but because the quiet had been my only companion for too long, and speaking aloud felt like flexing a long-disused muscle. By the second week, he'd gained enough strength to stand on shaky legs, mapping out the mudroom with careful steps, and an attentive nose. I expanded his territory to include the kitchen and living room, removing anything fragile or dangerous. He moved with increasing confidence, memorizing the layout until he could navigate without bumping into furniture. It was remarkable how quickly he adapted, how resilient he proved to be. It was during the 3rd week that I noticed the first change. I'd been sitting on the floor near him, reading aloud from my latest mystery novel, when I glanced over and caught a flicker of something different in his eyes. Where they had been cloudy white, I now saw the faintest hint of color emerging at the centers, a warm amber that seemed to glow in the firelight. "Your eyes," I gasped, forgetting for a moment that he couldn't understand me. "They're changing." His head tilted at my voice, ears pricked forward with an intensity I hadn't seen before. For the first time since I'd found him, I wondered if there might be something more to his blindness than a simple injury. Something almost supernatural. But I quickly dismissed the thought. Living alone in the mountains was clearly affecting my rationality. As days passed, the transformation continued. The milky film receded further, revealing more of that unusual golden hue. Sometimes, when I entered a room, I could swear he was tracking my movements before I made a sound, but that was impossible, wasn't it? I started taking him outside, keeping him on a makeshift lead fashioned from a rope. At first, he stayed close to my legs, nervous in the open space with its unpredictable terrain. But gradually, his confidence grew. He lifted his snout to the wind, seemingly remembering scents from his life before blindness. These outings became the highlight of my days. Watching him reconnect with the natural world felt like witnessing a rebirth. On the eve of the 4th week, a fierce storm rolled through the valley. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning turned night to day in violent flashes. The wolf paced anxiously through the cabin, whining at each thunderclap. Without thinking, I sat on the floor and opened my arms. "Come here," I said gently. "It's okay." To my astonishment, he padded over and settled beside me, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. We sat that way for hours, 2 broken creatures finding comfort in proximity as the storm raged outside. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I opened my eyes, weak morning light was filtering through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar stillness that follows nature's fury. I started to stretch my stiff limbs, but froze when I realized the wolf's head was now resting heavily on my lap. Somehow, during the night, the final barrier between us had dissolved. With trembling fingers, I reached out and for the first time touched the coarse fur between his ears. He didn't flinch or growl. Instead, he leaned slightly into my palm. Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. Such a small gesture of trust, yet it cracked something open inside me that I'd kept sealed tight since the funeral. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was thanking him or whatever force had brought him to me. Later that morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, I was making coffee when I heard a strange sound behind me. Not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Something in between that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I turned slowly. The wolf stood in the doorway, his posture alert, head held high. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. The transformation was complete. Where blindness had clouded his vision just weeks before, 2 brilliant golden eyes now stared at me with unmistakable awareness. Not the eyes of a wild animal, but something else entirely. Something that spoke of ancient wisdom and impossible knowledge. As I stood frozen in shock, the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressure building as though a storm was brewing inside the cabin itself. The wolf took a step forward, then another, his movement suddenly fluid and purposeful. When he was just feet away, he sat back on his haunches and looked directly into my eyes. 4 weeks I've waited, he said, his voice deep and rough, as though human speech was an ill-fitting garment. 4 weeks to heal what was broken, to find what was lost. And now I see you clearly, at last. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. "You're my fated mate," he continued, those golden eyes never leaving mine. "The one I've searched for across time itself." And just like that, Everything I thought I knew about my quiet, isolated existence shattered like the mug at my feet. I backed away until my spine pressed against the kitchen counter, my heart hammering so violently I could feel it in my throat. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the countertop to steady myself. "This isn't happening," I whispered, more to myself than to the creature before me. "I'm hallucinating, or dreaming. That's it. I'm still asleep on the floor after the storm." The wolf, no, not just a wolf, something else entirely, remained perfectly still, those golden eyes watching me with unsettling patience. When he spoke again, I could see the strange way his mouth formed the words, canine features somehow adapting to human speech. "Your fear scent is sharp," he said. "I don't wish to frighten you. I've known who you were from the moment you found me, even without my sight." A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. "Known who I was? I don't even know who you are, what you are." "My name is Thane," he replied simply, as though this were the most normal conversation in the world. "I am what your kind might call a shifter. My true form walks on 2 legs, but I was trapped in this one after an encounter with those who fear what they don't understand." I shook my head, blonde hair falling across my face. I pushed it back with trembling fingers. "Shifters aren't real. They're stories, myths," says the woman who's been nursing a blind wolf back to health for a month, he countered, and I could have sworn there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Your grandmother knew better. The locket you wear. She understood the old ways." My hand flew to the silver pendant at my throat. How could he possibly know about my grandmother? About the significance of her gift? I'd never spoken of it while he was present. At least I didn't think I had. "What do you mean, fated mate?" I asked, seizing on the phrase that frightened me most. "I'm not anyone's mate. I'm just someone who found an injured animal." Thane tilted his head, a gesture so reminiscent of his wolf behavior that for a moment I could almost believe this was all some elaborate hallucination, that stress and isolation had finally broken something essential in my mind. "Among my kind, there exists a bond deeper than your human concept of love," he explained. "A recognition at soul level, rare, even for us. I've lived over 2 centuries waiting to feel it." 2 centuries? I echoed weakly. "We age differently," he said, as though this were a minor detail. "When I was attacked and blinded, I was tracking a scent that had been calling to me for months. Your scent, though I didn't yet understand what it meant. The attack left me vulnerable, unable to shift back to human form while healing. And then you found me." I sank slowly to the floor, mindless of the broken ceramic and spilled coffee surrounding me. This couldn't be happening, and yet, hadn't there been moments over the past weeks when I'd felt something unusual? The way his recovery had seemed almost miraculous, the strange comfort I'd found in his presence, despite the irrationality of harboring a wild predator. "Let's say, hypothetically, that I believe any of this," I said carefully. "What exactly do you expect from me?" "For now, nothing," Thane replied. "You weren't meant to discover my nature this way. The bond works best when accepted freely, not forced by circumstance. Then why tell me at all? Why not just leave once you were healed?" My voice cracked on the last word, betraying the unexpected pain the thought of his departure caused me. "Because the hunters who did this to me are still out there," he said, his tone darkening. "And now that you've helped me, your scent is mixed with mine. They could track you too." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Hunters? What hunters?" "There are those who know about my kind and see us as abominations, or worse, as trophies to be collected." His ears flattened against his skull, a visual reminder of his dual nature. "The man who leads them, Sullivan, has been hunting my pack for decades. His family has passed down the vendetta for generations." The name meant nothing to me, but the concept of being hunted sent cold fear crawling across my skin. I thought of my isolated cabin, miles from any neighbor, once a sanctuary, now potentially a trap. "So what happens now?" I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Thane's gaze softened slightly. "Now I protect you while my strength returns fully, and then, if you're willing, I take you to meet my pack. They can help keep you safe until Sullivan and his hunters are dealt with. Your pack, I repeated numbly. There are more like you, not exactly like me. Each shifter has their own nature, their own story, but yes, there are others who share the dual existence. They've been searching for me since I disappeared. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything. When I'd moved to this remote cabin, I'd been seeking escape from a world that had taken everything from me. Daniel's death had left me hollow, a ghost moving through the motions of living. Caring for the injured wolf, for Thane, had been the first thing to make me feel something real again, and now this impossible revelation threatened to pull me back into a reality even more complex and dangerous than the one I'd fled. I need time, I said finally, opening my eyes to find him still watching me intently. It's too much. Time is something I can give you, he replied, but not much of it. My strength returns more each day, and with it, my ability to shift forms. Soon, I'll be able to take human shape again, and when that happens, Sullivan's hunters will sense the power surge. They have ways of tracking such things. The implication was clear. Our strange coexistence was operating on a countdown. The thought should have terrified me completely. Yet beneath the fear lurked something else. A flicker of anticipation. I hesitated, unsure how to phrase such an absurd question. Can you show me? Your human form, I mean. Thane shook his massive head. Not yet. The shift requires energy I'm still rebuilding. But soon. Within days, perhaps. A strange disappointment washed through me, followed immediately by embarrassment. What was happening to me? 24 hours ago, I'd been caring for what I thought was a blind wolf. Now I was disappointed I couldn't see the man he claimed to become. I got to my feet carefully, avoiding the broken mug shards. I'm going to clean this up, and then I need to think. Alone. Of course, he said, backing away to give me space. I'll be here when you're ready to talk more. The casual domesticity of our exchange, as though we were simply roommates navigating a minor disagreement rather than whatever this was, struck me as so absurd that I nearly laughed again. Instead, I busied myself with sweeping up the broken ceramic, grateful for the mundane task to ground me. Throughout the day, I moved through the cabin in a daze, Thane keeping a respectful distance but never far from sight. I caught him watching me with those golden eyes that now seemed to hold endless depths I hadn't noticed before. Or had they always been there, and I'd simply lacked the context to understand what I was seeing? As evening approached, I retreated to the porch with a blanket and a glass of wine, staring out at the forest that suddenly seemed less a refuge and more a mysterious realm harboring secrets I'd never imagined. The temperature dropped with the sun, but I welcomed the chill against my flushed skin. Footsteps behind me, padded paws on wooden planks, announced his presence. Without turning, I asked, "How many others are there? Like you, I mean." "Fewer than there once were," Thane replied, settling beside my rocking chair. "My pack number's 18. We're one of the larger ones remaining." "And they all shift? Between human and wolf?" "Yes. Though some have greater control than others, the younger ones struggle during full moons. The oldest among us can change at will, regardless of lunar cycles." I took a long sip of wine. "And this mate thing, how does it work? Do all of your kind have them?" "No," he said, and I heard something like reverence in his voice. "Most never find their true mate. They form bonds of companionship, of pack loyalty, but the soul-deep recognition I felt with you, it's rare enough to be considered legend even among my people." "But how can I be your mate?" I pressed. "I'm not like you. I'm just human." "The mate bond doesn't follow species lines," Thane explained. "It's older than either of our kinds, a magic from the time when all boundaries were thinner. Some believe it's nature's way of strengthening bloodlines, introducing new vitality." I nearly choked on my wine. "Bloodlines? You can't seriously be suggesting—" "I'm not speaking of immediate concerns," he said quickly, "and if wolves could blush, I think he might have. The bond is foremost a connection of spirits. The rest would be your choice, always." The clarification did little to calm the sudden flutter in my chest. I changed the subject. "These hunters, How do they track your kind? Thane's demeanor shifted, tension radiating from his body. They use a combination of old magic and modern technology, blood spells that can detect shifters when we change form, thermal imaging that identifies our unique heat signatures. And sometimes they use those of us they've captured to track others. The casual mention of capture sent ice through my veins. Is that what they did to you? Capture you? They tried, he growled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. They used silver-infused weapons to weaken me, and a ritual to temporarily blind me, to prevent me from finding my way home to my pack. But they underestimated my resilience. I escaped before they could cage me, though the injuries left me vulnerable. That's when you found me. I thought back to that rainy morning that felt like a lifetime ago. You were so weak. I thought you might die. I likely would have without your care, he acknowledged. The blindness was the worst of it, a spell designed to disorient and incapacitate, but they didn't account for you, for me. What do you mean? The touch of a fated mate can heal wounds that would otherwise be fatal to my kind, Thane said softly. Each time you came near, each time you spoke to me or tended my needs, your presence was countering their magic without you even knowing it. The implications staggered me, so I didn't just find you by accident. There are no accidents in this world, only patterns we haven't yet recognized, he replied, echoing a sentiment my grandmother had often expressed. The parallel sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Night had fully descended now, the forest around us alive with cricket song, and the occasional distant howl that suddenly held new meaning. Would Thane answer if I asked him to? Would his voice join those calling through the darkness, announcing his presence to others of his kind? What will happen when you shift back? I asked instead. Will you remember being the wolf? Remember all this time we've spent together? Every moment, he assured me. The wolf is not separate from the man. They are aspects of the same being. My awareness, my feelings, they remain constant, regardless of form. Feelings. The word hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us seemed ready to address directly. It's getting late, I said finally, rising from my chair. And apparently we both have a lot to prepare for in the coming days. Thane nodded, those golden eyes luminous in the darkness. Rest. I'll keep watch tonight. The casual promise of protection shouldn't have comforted me as much as it did. Yet as I made my way upstairs to my bedroom, leaving him downstairs for the first time since his revelation, I felt strangely secure in the knowledge that he was guarding the house. My last thought before drifting into sleep was a question. Had I saved him? Or had he somehow saved me from the half-life I'd been living since Daniel's death? Dawn broke with unusual brilliance the next morning, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window with almost painful intensity. I stretched beneath the covers, momentarily disoriented by how deeply I'd slept. No nightmares. No waking in cold sweat with Daniel's name on my lips, just solid, restful sleep for the first time in years. As consciousness fully returned, so did the memory of yesterday's impossible revelation. I sat up abruptly. Thane. The shifter. My apparent fated mate. Had it all been a stress-induced hallucination? The sound of something heavy falling downstairs answered my question before I could even form it completely. I threw back the covers and raced to the door, heart pounding. Thane, I called, rushing toward the stairs. What's happening? His answer came as a strangled sound, half growl, half human cry that sent fear spiraling through me. When I reached the bottom step, I saw him in the center of the living room, body contorted in what appeared to be agonizing pain, golden eyes now blazing with an internal fire that seemed almost too bright to look at directly. Stay back, he managed to warn, voice deeper and rougher than before. It's happening. The shift. Coming too soon. I froze on the bottom step, unable to look away from the transformation unfolding before me. Thane's body seemed to ripple, the very structure of his bones visibly shifting beneath his fur. His spine elongated with a series of sickening cracks that made my stomach lurch. Yet despite my horror, I couldn't retreat. Something primal kept me rooted to the spot, witnessing what few humans ever had. What can I do? I whispered, my voice barely audible over his labored breathing. He couldn't answer now, lost in the throes of the change. His front paws stretched, fingers elongating where there had been only padded feet moments before. The thick fur began to recede in patches, revealing pale skin underneath. I pressed a hand to my mouth, torn between fascination and the instinct to flee from something so fundamentally unnatural. The process seemed to last both an eternity and mere seconds. When it finally stilled, a naked man lay curled on my living room floor, his body gleaming with sweat, tremors still running through his newly formed muscles. Dark hair, nearly black, fell across a face that remained partially hidden against the hardwood. For several heartbeats, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up to a sitting position, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. He was beautiful in a way that stole my breath, features too perfect to be entirely human. Those same golden eyes now set in a face that seemed sculpted rather than born, high cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and lips that curved slightly even in repose. He looked to be in his 30s, though if what he'd told me about shifter longevity was true, he could be decades or even centuries older. I suddenly realized I was staring, and averted my eyes, my cheeks burning. "I'll get you some clothes." Hurrying back upstairs, I rummaged through the boxes in the spare room, until I found some of Daniel's things I hadn't been able to part with. The pain I expected to feel at handling them again was surprisingly dull, a ghost of grief rather than its full force. I selected a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that might fit Thane's broader frame, then headed back downstairs with my eyes carefully trained on the floor. "Here," I said, holding them out without looking directly at him. "Thank you," he replied, his voice now fully human yet still carrying that same resonance I'd grown accustomed to. The sound of fabric rustling told me he was dressing. "You can look now." When I raised my eyes, I found him standing, sweatpants on, but the t-shirt still clutched in one hand. The sight of his bare torso, marked with several long scars that looked like claw marks across his ribs, sent an unexpected heat through me. "Sorry," he said, noting my expression. "The shift is never painless, but this one was particularly difficult. My body wasn't fully prepared. Why did it happen now? You said it would be days." He pulled the shirt over his head, wincing slightly. "I felt them. The hunters. They're closer than I thought, tracking faster than expected." Fear shot through me, sharp and cold. "Here? They're coming here." "Not immediately, but soon. Within a day, perhaps 2. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture strangely vulnerable. The shift was a defense mechanism, my body's way of preparing for threat. I sank onto the sofa, trying to process this new development. Thane remained standing, his posture betraying discomfort with his new form. "Is it difficult, being human again after so long as a wolf?" He flexed his fingers, studying them with a slight frown. "It requires adjustment. Sensations are different, more acute in some ways, duller in others." I watched him move cautiously across the room, his gait becoming smoother with each step as he reacquainted himself with bipedal motion. There was something deeply intimate about witnessing this process, like seeing someone learn to walk again after injury. "You should eat something," I said, suddenly remembering my caretaker role. "The transformation must require energy." "It does," he agreed, following me to the kitchen. "More than you might imagine." I set about making a substantial breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast. Hyper-aware of his presence behind me, the domestic normalcy of cooking while a mythical creature sat at my kitchen table struck me again with its absurdity. "How long have you lived here alone?" he asked, breaking the silence. I cracked eggs into a bowl, focusing on the task. "Almost 2 years. After Daniel, my fiancé, died, I couldn't stay in the city anymore. Everything reminded me of him." "I'm sorry for your loss," Thane said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made my throat tighten. "Cancer," I offered without being asked. It was quick, at least. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We'd barely started planning the wedding. I hadn't spoken about Daniel to anyone in months. Yet here I was, sharing my deepest pain with a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger anymore. Grief changes us, Thane observed quietly, reshapes our very souls. I've lived long enough to lose many I've cared for. I turned to look at him, struck by the ancient sorrow in eyes that appeared so youthful. How old are you really? By human counting, 243 years, he replied. Young among my kind, actually. Our alpha is nearly 500. The eggs nearly slipped from my hands. 500 years? How is that possible? The dual nature extends our lifespan. The wolf heals what would kill the human. The human mind preserves what would be lost to animal instinct. He accepted the plate I offered, adding, though we can die, from sufficient violence, or by choice when the centuries become too heavy to bear. I sat across from him, my own appetite diminished by this casual discussion of centuries-long existence. And these fated mates you mentioned, do they live as long? Something flickered across his features. Hesitation, perhaps. Sometimes. The bond can extend a human lifespan, though not to the full measure of a shifter's years. But that's rare. The implication hung between us. Even if I accepted this bizarre connection between us, I would eventually age and die while he remained. The thought sent a peculiar pain through me that I couldn't quite name. Why me? I asked suddenly. What makes someone a fated mate? Is there something special about me that I don't know? Thane set down his fork, giving the question serious consideration. The old stories speak of complementary souls, individuals whose essential natures balance each other perfectly. Beyond that? He shrugged. It's one of the great mysteries, even to us. I only know that from the moment you approached me in the rain, something in me recognized something in you. He reached across the table, hesitating just before his fingers would have touched mine. I realize how frightening this must be. How impossible it seems. I don't expect you to embrace any of it. Certainly not immediately. I drew back slightly, not ready for contact that now held such loaded significance. These hunters you mentioned, tell me more about them. What exactly are we facing? The shift in subject wasn't subtle, but Thane accepted it gracefully. Sullivan comes from a line of hunters stretching back generations. They believe shifters are abominations, unnatural creatures that upset the divine order. But there's more to it than religious fervor. They harvest parts from our bodies, teeth, claws, hearts, believing they hold magical properties. And sometimes they're right. My stomach turned at the casual description of such barbarity. That's horrific. The natural world has always been red in tooth and claw, he said without apparent emotion. We've just developed more elaborate justifications for our predatory natures. The philosophical detachment in his tone reminded me sharply of his inhuman perspective, of centuries lived watching mankind's cruelty evolve into ever more sophisticated forms. So what's our plan? I asked, pulling us back to immediate concerns. You mentioned taking me to your pack. Yes, it remains the safest option. My territory lies about 40 miles north, deep in the mountains where humans rarely venture. My people can protect you while we deal with Sullivan. And after? What happens after these hunters are dealt with? I couldn't quite bring myself to ask directly if he meant to kill them. Thane's golden gaze held mine steadily. That would depend entirely on you. The mate bond doesn't create obligation, only possibility. You would be free to return to your life here, if that's what you choose. The thought of returning to my solitary existence after all this should have been comforting. A promise of eventual return to normalcy. Instead, it left me feeling strangely hollow. We should leave today, he continued, rising from the table. Pack only what you can't live without. We'll travel on foot through the forest. Less chance of being spotted that way. On foot? 40 miles? I stared at him incredulously. That would take days. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his features. For humans, perhaps. I can carry you in wolf form for much of it. We'll reach my territory by nightfall tomorrow if we leave within the hour. The casual assertion of his supernatural abilities reminded me yet again of how little I truly knew about him, about what he was capable of. I'd witnessed his transformation, fed him at my table, yet he remained fundamentally mysterious. I gestured vaguely upstairs, suddenly overwhelmed. Pack, think. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Take the time you need. I'll keep watch. In my bedroom, I moved on autopilot, pulling essentials into a backpack while my mind raced. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether the wolf's eyesight would fully recover. Now I was preparing to flee from murderous hunters with a man who'd spent weeks as an animal in my care. My hand brushed against my grandmother's locket as I reached for a sweater. I paused, remembering Thane's words. Your grandmother knew better. She understood the old ways. Had she known? Had there been signs throughout my childhood that I'd missed or forgotten? I'd always attributed her tales of forest spirits and ancient magic to an old woman's fancy. Charming nonsense from another era. Now I wondered what else she might have tried to prepare me for. When I returned downstairs, backpack slung over my shoulder, Thane was standing at the window, his posture alert. He'd rolled the sleeves of Daniel's t-shirt up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. He turned at my approach, golden eyes assessing. Ready? He asked simply. I nodded, though ready was perhaps the furthest thing from what I felt. As I'll ever be. Leaving my cabin felt like abandoning the last remnant of my former life. I stood on the porch, keys in hand, staring at the weathered door I'd painted myself during that first summer of solitude. Behind it lay the sanctuary I'd created, the place where I'd slowly begun to heal. We can come back, Thane said softly, reading my hesitation. When it's safe. I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. With deliberate movements, I locked the door and slipped the key into my pocket, a gesture of faith that there would indeed be a return journey. Thane led us toward the tree line at the northern edge of my property, his movements fluid and confident in a way they hadn't been earlier. With each step into the forest, he seemed to grow more at ease in his human skin, as though proximity to the wild was restoring something essential in him. I'll need to shift again soon, he explained as we navigated the increasingly dense underbrush. We'll cover ground faster that way, and I can better track any threats. The casual mention of his transformation sent a flutter of anxiety through me. Does it hurt? Every time? He glanced back, his expression softening. Less when it's voluntary. The forced shift this morning was unusually painful. We walked in silence for another mile or so, the forest growing thicker around us. Eventually, Thane stopped in a small clearing, turning to face me. This is far enough from any hiking trails, he said. I should change now. I nodded, unsure where to look or what to do. Despite having witnessed his transformation once already, I felt suddenly shy at the prospect of seeing it again, especially now that he was fully conscious and aware of my presence. You might want to turn around, he suggested with a hint of amusement. The clothes won't survive the shift. Heat rose to my cheeks as I quickly turned my back. The sound of fabric rustling told me he was undressing. I fixed my gaze on a nearby pine tree, studying its bark with unnecessary intensity. It won't take long, he said, his voice already changing, deepening to that strange register between human and animal. I kept my eyes averted as the sounds began, the crack of bones realigning, the wet sliding of tissues reshaping, and the low guttural moans that made my stomach clench in sympathy. When silence finally fell, I risked a glance over my shoulder. Where Thane the man had stood moments before, Thane the wolf now waited, his golden eyes the only unchanged feature in the transformation. He seemed larger somehow than I remembered, his black fur glossier, his stance more powerful. Perhaps it was simply that I was seeing him now through new understanding. Not as a wounded animal, but as a being who had chosen this form. He patted toward me, nudging my hand with his muzzle. The gesture was startlingly intimate now that I knew the consciousness behind those eyes was fully aware, fully human in its complexity. What now? I asked, my voice sounding thin in the forest's vastness. Thane moved a few paces away, then looked back at me expectantly. When I didn't immediately follow, he returned and gently took the edge of my jacket sleeve between his teeth, tugging me toward his side. You want me to ride on your back? I asked incredulously. He dipped his massive head in what could only be interpreted as a nod. Is that even possible? I mean, you're big for a wolf, but I'm not exactly small. The look he gave me was so distinctly unimpressed that I almost laughed despite my anxiety. He nudged me again, more insistently. All right, I muttered, approaching his side cautiously. But if I hurt you? Before I could finish, he lowered himself to the ground, making his intention unmistakable. Taking a deep breath, I carefully straddled his back, fingers tentatively threading through the thick fur at his shoulders. Like this, I whispered. His only response was to rise smoothly to his feet, adjusting slightly to balance my weight. I gasped, tightening my grip reflexively as I felt the power of the muscles moving beneath me. He took a few experimental steps, seemingly unbothered by my presence on his back. This is insane, I said, half to myself. Absolutely insane. Thane made a sound suspiciously like a chuckle deep in his throat. Then, without further warning, he began to move. What started as a walk quickly accelerated into a smooth, loping run that ate up the forest floor beneath us. I clung to him, my body gradually learning to move with his rather than against it. The world blurred into streaks of green and brown as he navigated paths invisible to human eyes, ducking beneath low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs with supernatural grace. The initial terror of the speed gave way to something unexpected. Exhilaration. Wind whipped my hair back from my face, carrying the rich scents of pine and earth. Sunlight dappled through the canopy above, creating patterns that shifted and danced across Thane's dark fur. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, every sense heightened by the sheer impossibility of what we were doing. We traveled this way for hours, Thane maintaining a pace that would have exhausted any natural wolf. Occasionally he would slow, lifting his nose to test the air, or cocking his head to listen for distant sounds I couldn't perceive. During these pauses, I would slide from his back to stretch my cramped legs, careful never to stray far from his side. By late afternoon, the terrain had changed dramatically. We were climbing now, the forest giving way to steeper, rockier ground that spoke of the mountain's true beginning. Thane navigated the increasingly challenging landscape with the confidence of one returning to familiar territory. During one of our brief rest stops, I retrieved a water bottle from my pack, gulping thirstily before offering some in my cupped palm to Thane. He lapped at it gratefully, his golden eyes never leaving my face. "Are we getting close?" I asked, though I knew he couldn't answer in this form. He huffed softly, gesturing with his muzzle toward the peak still looming ahead of us. Not yet, but progress was being made. As twilight began to settle around us, Thane led us to a small cave set into the mountainside. It was shallow but dry, offering protection from the elements in a defensible position. He indicated I should enter first, then followed, positioning himself near the entrance where he could monitor any approach. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the sun, and I shivered, pulling an extra layer from my backpack. Thane watched me with what seemed like concern, then surprised me by moving closer, curling his warm body around mine where I sat against the cave wall. "Oh," I said softly, startled by the gesture. "Thank you." The shared warmth was practical, I told myself, nothing more. Yet I couldn't deny the strange comfort I found in his proximity, in the steady rhythm of his breathing and the solid weight of him against my side. Despite the utter strangeness of our situation, I felt safer than I had in years. As full darkness descended, Thane's ears suddenly pricked forward, his body tensing beside me. A low growl rumbled in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable in its warning. "What is it?" I whispered, fear instantly flooding back. "The hunters?" He rose to his feet, moving to the cave entrance with silent grace. I followed, staying close behind him as he peered into the night. For several long moments we stood frozen, Thane's attention fixed on something I couldn't perceive. Then, from the darkness beyond, came an answering sound. A wolf's howl, hauntingly beautiful in the night air. Thane's posture changed immediately, the tension bleeding away. He turned to me, nudging my hand reassuringly. Before looking back into the darkness, a second howl joined the first, then a third, creating an eerie chorus that echoed across the mountains. To my astonishment, Thane threw back his head and answered, his voice rising to join the others in a call that sent shivers down my spine. "Your pack?" I asked, understanding dawning. He dipped his head in confirmation, then gestured with his muzzle for me to stay put as he padded a few yards from the cave entrance. There he waited, golden eyes gleaming in the darkness, as three shapes materialized from the shadows. Wolves, no, shifters, moved into the small clearing before our shelter. Even to my untrained eye, they looked different from ordinary wolves, larger, with an unnatural awareness in their postures. They approached Thane cautiously, exchanging scents and quiet vocalizations that seemed almost like conversation. I remained in the cave entrance, heart pounding as the reunion unfolded. After several minutes of what appeared to be intense communication, Thane turned and beckoned me forward with a gesture of his head. "You want me to come out there?" I asked nervously. His golden eyes held mine steadily, a clear invitation. Swallowing my fear, I stepped from the shelter of the cave into the moonlight where the four wolves waited. The newcomers regarded me with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. The largest, a gray wolf with a scarred muzzle, approached first, circling me slowly while I stood frozen, unsure what was expected of me. Thane remained close, his body language alert but not alarmed. The gray wolf completed his inspection, then looked directly at Thane with an expression that somehow conveyed incredulity, even on lupine features. A female with reddish-brown fur approached next, her assessment seemingly more thorough as she sniffed at my clothes, my hair, my outstretched hand. Hello," I said awkwardly, feeling ridiculous for speaking aloud to creatures I now knew were as intelligent as any human. "I'm guessing you're Thane's friends." The red wolf made a sound that might have been amusement before backing away to rejoin the others. The third wolf, smaller and younger looking with mottled gray and black fur, seemed the most openly curious, tilting his head at me in an almost playful manner. Thane moved to my side, pressing against my leg in what felt like a protective gesture. The gray wolf, who I was beginning to suspect might be the alpha Thane had mentioned, made a short, sharp bark that seemed to carry an order. Immediately, the younger wolf disappeared into the trees, moving with astonishing speed. "What's happening?" I whispered to Thane, though I knew he couldn't answer in his current form. The red female approached again, this time carrying something in her mouth, a bundle of fabric that she dropped at my feet. I bent to pick it up, realizing it was clothing, a simple shirt and pants, clearly intended for Thane. Understanding dawned. "You're going to shift back?" Thane nodded, then looked pointedly toward the cave. I took the hint and retreated inside with the clothes, giving him privacy for the transformation. Through the cave entrance, I caught glimpses of the other wolves forming a protective circle, their attention directed outward as though standing guard. Several minutes later, Thane appeared at the entrance, now in human form, and dressed in the clothes his packmates had provided. His hair was disheveled, his expression weary but alert. "They've been searching for me since I disappeared," he explained without preamble. "When they sensed my shift this morning, they changed course to intercept us." "That's good, right?" I asked, relief mixing with a new anxiety at the presence of more shifters. "More protection." His expression remained grave. "They bring news. Sullivan's hunters have divided their forces, some still tracking my original trail, but others..." He hesitated. "Others were headed toward your cabin when my pack picked up their scent." Cold fear washed through me. "My cabin? But why would they go there if they're tracking you?" "Because they know what you are to me now," Thane said softly. "And taking a shifter's mate is the surest way to draw them into a trap." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. How could they possibly know? I didn't even know until yesterday. Thane ran a hand through his dark hair, his expression troubled. "There are ways, old magic, that can detect the forming of mate bonds. It's how Sullivan's family has hunted my kind for generations. They seek out those with the potential for such connections and use them as bait. So I was already marked somehow, even before we met. The thought that I'd been unwittingly entangled entangled in this supernatural conflict long before finding Thane sent a wave of dizziness through me. Not exactly, Thane replied, guiding me back to sit against the cave wall. The potential was there, dormant. When we met, when you helped me, it began to activate. And when I shifted this morning, it would have sent out a pulse of energy that those attuned to such things could detect. The gray wolf appeared at the cave entrance, his massive form blocking much of the moonlight. He fixed Thane with an intense stare that seemed to communicate volumes. Ellis says we need to move, Thane translated. They've picked up hunter activity less than 10 miles south. Ellis? I echoed, looking at the imposing wolf with new understanding. The Alpha? Thane nodded. He's been leading our pack for over a century. If anyone can get us safely to our territory, it's him. The red female joined Ellis at the entrance, her intelligent eyes assessing me with unnerving directness. That's Nara, Thane said. Our best tracker. And the younger one is Kale. Newest to the pack, but fiercely loyal. And I tried to process the fact that these wolves were people, individuals with names and histories and personalities. People who could, presumably, take human form just as Thane had done. Why don't they shift? I asked. Wouldn't it be easier to communicate? Safer to remain as wolves while we're exposed, Thane explained. A human scent carries further, and we're less conspicuous as animals if any hikers or hunters pass by. Besides, Ellis prefers this form, says it keeps his thinking clearer. Ellis made a sound that might have been agreement before turning away, clearly expecting us to follow. Thane helped me to my feet, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. We'll travel through the night, he said. My pack knows these mountains intimately. Every cave, every hidden pass. By dawn, we should reach the outer boundaries of our territory. And then what? I asked, shouldering my backpack. What happens once we're there? Something softened in Thane's golden eyes. Then you'll see the home I've been trying to return to for a month, a place where my kind has lived in secret for centuries. We set out into the night, the 4 wolves forming a protective formation around me, Ellis and Nara taking point, Thane at my side, and Kale bringing up the rear. The darkness that should have been impenetrable was apparently no obstacle for them, as they moved with confident precision through terrain that had me stumbling despite my careful steps. After nearly an hour of slow progress, Thane stopped abruptly, turning to me with concern. This isn't working. You can't see well enough, and we're making too much noise. Before I could respond, he was already pulling his borrowed shirt over his head. I need to shift again. You'll ride as you did earlier, but your clothes, I began, embarrassed again by the practicalities of his dual nature. Kyle will carry them, he said, already unlacing the simple shoes he wore. It's more important that we move quickly now. The hunters are too close for comfort. I turned away as he undressed, hearing the now familiar sounds of transformation behind me. When I looked back, Thane the wolf stood waiting, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight. Ellis made a sound that seemed almost like approval before continuing forward, clearly expecting us to follow. Riding on Thane's back through the night forest was even more surreal than it had been during daylight. The world was reduced to shadows and silver patches of moonlight, the only constants being the warmth of his body beneath me and the rhythmic movement of his muscles as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The other wolves ghosted alongside us, occasionally disappearing from view, only to reappear moments later. They moved with a coordination that spoke of years hunting together, communicating through subtle signals I couldn't begin to interpret. We traveled this way for hours, the mountains growing steeper and more rugged around us. Just when I thought I couldn't endure the cold night air any longer, Ellis led us into a narrow pass between towering rock faces. The path wound upward, becoming so steep in places that I had to slide from Thane's back and climb using my hands as well as my feet. Near the summit of the pass, Ellis suddenly froze, his head lifting as he scented the air. The other wolves immediately tensed, forming a tight circle around me. A low growl rumbled from Ellis's throat, a sound of unmistakable warning. Thane nudged me toward a crevice in the rock face, his intention clear. Hide. I squeezed into the narrow space, heart pounding as the wolves took up defensive positions, their bodies low and ready for confrontation. For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, Carried on the night breeze came the sound of voices. Human voices, speaking in low, urgent tones. From my hiding place, I could make out fragments of conversation. Definitely pass this way. Silver ammunition only. Take the girl alive if possible. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of boots on rocky ground. I pressed deeper into my hiding place, scarcely daring to breathe. Through a gap in the rocks, I could see Ellis signal to Nara and Kale, who melted into the shadows on either side of the path. What happened next unfolded with such speed that my human eyes could barely follow. As the first hunter rounded the bend in the pass, Ellis launched himself from his position, a silent, lethal shadow that collided with the man before he could raise his weapon. Simultaneously, Nara attacked from the opposite side, her teeth finding the second hunter's arm with surgical precision. Thane remained by my hiding place, his body coiled with tension, ready to defend if any threat broke through the other's assault. Through my limited view, I saw Ellis pin the first hunter to the ground, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. To my shock, the hunter laughed. A cold, unnatural sound that echoed off the rock walls. "You won't kill me, beast," he said with chilling confidence. "Not while we have your people." Ellis froze, his growl faltering for just an instant. It was enough. The hunter beneath him twisted, producing a small object from his jacket that he pressed against the wolf's side. A flash of blue light erupted, accompanied by a high-pitched sound that hurt even my human ears. Ellis recoiled, his massive body convulsing as though struck by electricity. "No," I gasped, the sound escaping before I could stop it. The hunter's head snapped in my direction, his eyes finding mine through the gap in the rocks. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "There you are," he said softly. "The mate." Thane exploded into motion, placing himself between the hunter and my hiding place, with a snarl that seemed to shake the very mountain beneath us. The hunter raised his strange device, but before he could activate it, Kyle attacked from behind, knocking the man forward. The device skittered across the rocky ground, coming to rest at the edge of the path. Nara had subdued the second hunter, but a third emerged from the shadows further down the pass, a conventional weapon raised. The gunshot shattered the night, the bullet striking rock inches from where Kale struggled with the first hunter. Everything seemed to slow down. I saw Thane hesitate, torn between protecting me and helping his packmates. I saw Ellis struggling to his feet, still disoriented from whatever the device had done to him. And I saw the third hunter taking aim again, this time with Thane in his sights. Without conscious thought, I burst from my hiding place, diving for the fallen device on the ground. My fingers closed around it just as the hunter fired again. The bullet went wide, ricocheting off the rock face with a shower of sparks. The device was simple, a small metal cylinder with a button on one end. Operating on pure instinct, I pointed it at the armed hunter and pressed. The same blue light erupted, accompanied by that painful sound. The hunter dropped his weapon, clutching his head and falling to his knees. The effect on the human was less severe than it had been on Ellis, but still clearly debilitating. "Thane," I shouted. "The light affects them too." Understanding flashed in his golden eyes. With renewed purpose, he charged the first hunter, who was now scrambling for a weapon in his belt. Kale, following Thane's lead, went for the second man, who had broken free from Nara's grip. In the chaos that followed, I kept the device trained on the third hunter, preventing him from recovering. Ellis had regained his footing and joined the fray, his massive jaws closing around the arm of the first hunter with a sickening crunch of bone. The skirmish ended as quickly as it had begun. The hunters, realizing they were outmatched, retreated down the pass, one of them half carrying their injured companion. Their retreat seemed too easily won, and the cold smile of the lead hunter lingered in my mind like a bad omen. When silence had fallen again, Thane returned to my side, checking me for injuries with anxious movements. I was shaking, the device still clutched in my hand. "I'm okay," I assured him, though my voice trembled. What was that? What did I just do? Ellis approached, his respect for me visibly changed after my intervention. He nudged the device with his nose, then looked at Thane meaningfully. "It's a sonic disruptor," Thane explained after a moment, designed specifically to target our enhanced senses. The fact that it affected the hunters, too, suggests they've been augmented somehow. "The man said they have your people," I said quietly. "What did he mean?" Thane exchanged a look with Ellis, some silent communication passing between them. "We've had members of our pack go missing over the past year," he admitted. "We assumed they'd been killed, but if Sullivan is holding them captive..." The implications hung in the air between us, adding new urgency to our journey. Ellis made a sharp barking sound, clearly an order to move out. This time, there was no argument. We continued through the night with renewed purpose, the encounter with the hunters having shaken any complacency from our group. By the time dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, we had crossed through the pass and descended into a hidden valley nestled high in the mountains. As the first rays of sunlight touched the valley floor, I gasped at the sight revealed before us. Nestled among ancient pines stood a collection of cabins and larger structures, blended so seamlessly with the natural environment that they would be nearly invisible from the air. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, and as we approached, I saw figures moving about, some human in form, others as wolves. "Welcome to Wolf Haven," Thane said softly, having shifted back to human form and quickly dressed in the clothes Cale had carried, "our home for the past 300 years. As we descended into the valley, people began to notice our approach. Word of our arrival spread quickly, and soon a crowd had gathered at the edge of the settlement. Some shifted from wolf to human form before my eyes, hastily donning clothes brought by others. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright suspicion as they regarded me. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light. Despite her apparent age, she moved with the fluid grace I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of shifters. "Thane," she said, her voice cracking with emotion as she embraced him. "We feared the worst." "Grandmother," he replied, returning her embrace before turning to include me. "This is the woman who saved me. My mate." The word hung in the air, causing a ripple of murmurs through the gathered crowd. The old woman's eyes, the same golden hue as Thane's, widened as she studied me with newfound interest. "A human mate," she said, wonder in her voice. After all these centuries, she stepped forward, taking my hands in her weathered ones. "Child, do you understand what you've become a part of? What it means to be bonded to one of our kind?" I met her gaze steadily, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "Not entirely," I admitted. "But I'm beginning to learn." She smiled then, a smile so like Thane's that my heart constricted. "That," she said softly, "is a very good beginning indeed."